Welcome back, and thanks for tuning into our Reddit cheating stories. Please subscribe to our channel. Let's dive in. The Tuesday morning started like any other. Coffee brewed, a hurried breakfast, the usual scramble to get out the door. I kissed Sarah goodbye, a peck that had become routine, and headed to work. I was a software engineer, and my days were filled with lines of code and the endless hum of servers. Sarah was a teacher, passionate about her students and dedicated to her job. We had been married for 7 years, and while the initial spark had mellowed into a comfortable warmth, I believed we were happy. Or, at least, I had believed. The first sign that something was terribly wrong was the barrage of messages. My phone vibrated incessantly throughout the morning. Mostly from friends, with a few from more distant acquaintances. Each message contained a link, usually accompanied by a cryptic, "Are you okay?" or a hesitant, "Have you seen this?" I initially ignored them. I was in the middle of debugging a particularly nasty piece of code and didn't have time for internet distractions. But the persistent buzz of my phone became impossible to ignore. Finally, during a brief lull, I clicked on one of the links. It led to a private video sharing site. The thumbnail was blurry, indistinct. My heart clenched as I pressed play. The video was short, shaky, and clearly filmed surreptitiously. It showed Sarah in a compromising position with a man who was definitely not me. The location was unfamiliar, a dimly lit room with generic hotel art on the walls. The sound was muffled, but there was no mistaking the intimacy of the scene. My world tilted. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and clammy. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick and suffocating. I felt a roaring in my ears, a dizzying disorientation that threatened to overwhelm me. I watched the video again. And again. Each time, the reality of what I was seeing slammed into me with renewed force. It was Sarah. There was no denying it. The curve of her neck, the way she laughed, the small mole on her shoulder, all unmistakable. The man was a stranger. Broad shoulders, dark hair, a confident swagger that I had never possessed. He looked everything I wasn't. The video ended. I sat there, numb, staring blankly at the screen. The hum of the servers, the chatter of my colleagues, all faded into a distant, meaningless drone. My mind was a chaotic jumble of disbelief, anger, hurt, and a profound sense of betrayal. How could this be happening? Sarah. My Sarah. The woman I had built a life with, the woman I trusted implicitly. I closed my laptop, my hand shaking so violently that I could barely manage it. I needed to get out of there. I mumbled something about a family emergency to my boss and stumbled out of the office, the faces of my colleagues blurring into a sea of concerned expressions. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the traffic, the stoplights, the other cars around me. My mind was consumed by the image of Sarah in that video, an image that had shattered my reality and left me adrift in a sea of confusion and pain. When I arrived, the house was empty. Sarah was still at work. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic thump-thump-thump of my own heart. I paced the living room, a caged animal trapped in a maze of uncertainty. I replayed the video in my mind, analyzing every detail, searching for some explanation, some way to make sense of the senseless. Was it a mistake? A moment of weakness? A cry for help? Or was it something more sinister, a sign that our marriage had been crumbling for years without my knowledge? I didn't know. And the not knowing was almost as unbearable as the video itself. I needed to confront her. I needed answers. I needed to understand how the woman I loved could do something that had so completely destroyed me. I waited, my anxiety mounting with each passing minute. The sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the room. Finally, I heard the familiar sound of Sarah's car pulling into the driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself, to prepare for the confrontation that was about to unfold. She walked in, her face tired but cheerful. "Honey, I'm home," she called out, dropping her bag on the floor. She stopped short when she saw me, her smile faltering. "What's wrong? You look terrible." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, my eyes burning with a mixture of anger and hurt. She stepped closer, her brow furrowed with concern. "What is it? Tell me." I reached for my laptop, which was still sitting open on the coffee table, the video paused on a particularly damning frame. I turned the screen towards her. Her face paled. Her eyes widened in horror. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Where did you get this?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. I just watched her, waiting for an explanation, a denial, anything that could alleviate the crushing weight of despair that had settled upon me. But she didn't deny it. She just stood there, frozen, her eyes filled with shame and regret. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the sound of our ragged breathing. Finally, I broke the silence. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice flat and emotionless. She didn't answer. "Sarah, who is he?" I repeated, my voice rising in anger. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "His name is Michael," she said, her voice barely audible. "Michael," I repeated, the name tasting like poison on my tongue. "And who is Michael to you?" She opened her eyes, her gaze filled with pain. He's someone I met at a conference a few months ago." "A conference?" I scoffed. "Is that what you call it? A conference?" "It just happened," she said, her voice pleading. "It was a mistake. I swear." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "A mistake that was captured on video and leaked to the entire world." She flinched, as if I had struck her. "I don't know how the video got out," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear, I had no idea." "So you're telling me you cheated on me, and you have no idea how a video of it ended up online?" I asked, my voice incredulous. "Do you really expect me to believe that?" She didn't answer. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice quieter now, the anger slowly giving way to a profound sense of sadness. "A few months," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. "A few months," I repeated, the words echoing in the empty room. "And all this time, you've been lying to me. You've been pretending that everything was fine. You've been looking me in the eye and telling me that you loved me, while you were sleeping with someone else." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I do love you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You hurt me more than you can possibly imagine." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone and defeated. I went to our bedroom, packed a bag with a few essentials, and walked out of the house. I didn't know where I was going, or what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there, not for another minute. I drove aimlessly for hours, the video replaying in my mind, each frame a fresh wound. I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I checked in, went to my room, and collapsed on the bed. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, the reality of what had happened slowly sinking in. My wife had cheated on me. And the evidence had been broadcast to the world. My life, as I knew it, was over. The next few days were a blur. I stayed in the motel, barely eating, barely sleeping. I called my boss and told him I needed some time off. He was understanding, but I could hear the pity in his voice. I avoided my phone, afraid of the messages that might be waiting for me. I knew that the video had gone viral. I knew that everyone I knew had seen it. I imagined the whispers, the stares, the judgment. I thought about Sarah. I tried to understand what had driven her to do what she did. Was I not good enough? Had I become complacent? Had I failed to meet her needs in some way? I also thought about Michael. Who was he? What did he have that I didn't? Was he better looking, more successful, more exciting? I hated them both. I hated Sarah for betraying me, for destroying our marriage, for shattering my trust. I hated Michael for seducing her, for stealing her away from me, for being the reason that my life was now in ruins. After a few days, I knew I couldn't stay in the motel forever. I needed to do something. I needed to face the situation, however painful it might be. I decided to go back home. When I arrived, the house was empty. Sarah was gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm so sorry," it read. "I know I've hurt you deeply. I've moved out. I need some time to figure things out. I'll be in touch. I crumpled the note in my hand and threw it in the trash. I felt nothing. Just a numb emptiness. I spent the next few days cleaning the house, trying to erase any trace of Sarah's presence. I packed up her clothes, her belongings, everything that reminded me of her. I wanted to start over, to create a space that was solely mine. The phone calls started soon after. My parents, her parents, mutual friends. Everyone wanted to know what was going on. Everyone wanted to offer their sympathy, their support, their unsolicited advice. I told them all the same thing, that Sarah and I were separated, and that I didn't want to talk about it. The internet was a different story. The video was everywhere. News sites, gossip blogs, social media, it had become a sensation. People were dissecting it, analyzing it, commenting on it. Some were sympathetic, others were judgmental, and still others were simply cruel. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. Every time I opened my computer, every time I looked at my phone, there it was, staring back at me. The comments were particularly brutal. People called Sarah names, slut-shamed her, and made vile assumptions about her character. They speculated about our marriage, about our sex life, about everything that was private and personal. I wanted to defend her, to tell them that she was a good person who had made a mistake. But I couldn't. I was too angry, too hurt, too betrayed. And then there were the comments directed at me. People called me a cuckold, a loser, a weakling. They mocked my appearance, my job, my entire life. I wanted to lash out, to fight back, to defend myself. But I knew it was pointless. Anything I said would only fuel the fire. I retreated further into myself, isolating myself from the world. I stopped going to work, stopped seeing my friends, stopped doing anything that brought me joy. I was consumed by bitterness, resentment, and a deep sense of loneliness. I couldn't see a way out of the darkness. One evening, I received a phone call from Sarah. I almost didn't answer it, but something compelled me to pick up. "Hello," I said, my voice cold and distant. "It's me," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to see you." I hesitated. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "Please," she begged. "It's important." I sighed. "Where?" We met at a park near our house. It was a place we had often gone for walks, a place that held many happy memories. Now, it just felt like another reminder of what I had lost. Sarah looked terrible. She was pale and gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, waiting for her to speak. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "I know I've destroyed everything. And I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it, Sarah," I said, my voice hard. "I know," she said. "But I need you to understand why I did what I did." I scoffed. "I don't think I want to understand," I said. "Please," she begged. "Just listen." I hesitated, then nodded. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She told me about how she had been feeling unfulfilled in our marriage, how she had felt like we were drifting apart, how she had felt like I was no longer paying attention to her. She told me about how she had met Michael at the conference, how he had made her feel alive and desired again, how she had been swept away by the excitement of a new relationship. She told me that she knew what she had done was wrong, that she regretted it deeply, and that she was willing to do anything to make things right. As she spoke, I listened, trying to understand. I realized that I had been so focused on my own work, on my own problems, that I had neglected her needs. I had taken her for granted. I had failed to appreciate her. I wasn't excusing her behavior, but I was beginning to understand it. "Why did you do it, Sarah?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" She looked down at the ground, her eyes filled with shame. "I was afraid," she said. "I was afraid of what you would say. I was afraid of losing you." "You lost me anyway," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I know," she said. "And I'll never forgive myself." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of our shared pain hanging heavy in the air. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I didn't know if we could ever repair the damage that had been done. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. But I knew that I loved her. And I knew that I didn't want to lose her. "I don't know," I said. "But I'm willing to try. If you are." She looked at me, her eyes filled with hope. "I am," she said. "I'll do anything." We talked for hours that night, airing our grievances, sharing our fears, and trying to find a way forward. It was a difficult conversation, filled with tears and anger and pain. But it was also a necessary conversation. We agreed to go to couples therapy. We agreed. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories of love, betrayal, and revenge. Like this video if you felt the emotion in this story. It really helps the channel grow. Comment below, what would you do in David's situation? Forgive or walk away? Share this video with friends who love dramatic storytelling. Stay tuned for more shocking twists and emotional stories, new uploads every week.